Good morning, everyone. It's Mr. Macaluso again. I wanted to make you this video about the Iliad. First off, you just finished the Iliad. You've read book 24, and you should be pretty proud of yourselves. Not many kids your age actually read the Iliad anymore. It's not an easy read, but if you really put some effort into it and did the reading that we asked you to do, you should feel pretty proud of yourself. It's an important piece of literature, and hopefully you will remember it, and you'll find it useful to kind of understand some things in life. Anyway, I want to do something that I've never done before. I want to give you a little talk on the Iliad, book 24, and while I'm talking, I'm going to be looking at some of the text. I've gone ahead and pasted some of the texts from book 24 into our team's class notebook. So you'll be able to access this yourself, and you'll want to access it after you listen to this recording, because there'll be a little quiz on this. Okay, so I will post this recording online for you to watch, and then I'll put a quiz out for you. So let's talk about book 24. At the beginning of book 24, Achilles continues to rage. Remember, that's how the epic started. It started with rage, and he rages over the death of his beloved friend Patroclus and his own impending death. Okay, now what was book 23 about? Book 23 was called the Funeral Games, and it was a funeral. It was a funeral celebrating the life of Patroclus. Okay, so the way the Greeks did it is they basically had their own little Olympics. Each Greek warrior competing for some kleos to celebrate the kleos of Patroclus. Okay, now what are funerals for? Obviously, you bury a body at a funeral, but really funerals are for the living. What are you supposed to get from a funeral? Well, I think you're supposed to get some sort of closure, right? Let's read the beginning of 24. The games were over now. The gathered armies scattered, each man to his fast ship, and fighters turned their minds to thoughts of food and the sweet warm grip of sleep. See right there, they can go to sleep, their grief is over. But Achilles kept on grieving for his friend, the memory burning on, and all subduing sleep could not take him. Not now. He turned and twisted side to side. He longed for Patroclus's manhood, his gallant heart. What rough campaigns they'd fought to an end together. What hardships they had suffered, cleaving their way through wars of men and pounding waves at sea. The memories flooded over him, live tears flowing, and now he'd lie on his side, now flat on his back, now face down again. At last, he'd leap to his feet, wander in anguish, aimless along the surf, and down on dawn, and dawn on dawn, flaming over the sea and shore would find him pacing. Then he'd yoke his racing team to the chariot harness, lash the corpse of Hector behind the car for dragging, and haul him 3 times round the dead Patroclus's tomb. And then he'd rest again in his tents and leave the body sprawled face down in the dust. But Apollo pitied Hector, dead man though he was, and warded all corruption off from Hector's corpse and round him. Head to foot, the great god wrapped the golden shield of storm so the skin would never rip as Achilles dragged him on. And so he kept on raging, shaming noble Hector, but the gods in bliss looked down and pitied Priam's son. So, has Achilles achieved closure for the death of Patroclus? I don't think so. He tosses and turns. He flips and flops all night long. He gets up and he drags the corpse around and around and around. He's clearly not over this, right? I'm sure the fact that Hector's body is not being corrupted by decay makes him even angrier, right? Because remember, Patroclus's death signifies his own death. And one of the things I think people have to worry about when they think about their own death is what's going to happen to your body. Achilles is this magnificent godlike creature, but that body is food for worms, right? And this is probably just fueling his rage even more. At the same time, Priam, I don't know why I want to say Priam also mourns. At the bottom of page 593, we see this. So he decreed, Zeus decreed, and Iris ran his message, racing with gale force to Priam's halls, where cries and mourning met her. Sons huddled round their father deep in the courtyard, robes drenched with tears, and the old man amidst them, buried, beaten down in the cloak that wrapped his body. Smeared on the old man's head and neck the dung lay, thick that he scraped up in his own hands, groveling in the filth. Throughout the house, his daughters and sons, wives wailed, remembering all the fine, brave men who lay dead, their lives destroyed at the fighting Argives' hands. So, Priam is beside himself in grief. He's taking horse dung and smeared it all over his head and in his hair. That's grief. And he laments that his surviving sons are, quote, good for nothings and public disgraces on page 596. He goes on and says, Hector, a god among man, no son of a mortal man, he seemed a deathless gods. But Ares killed them all of his other sons, and all he left me are these disgraces, liars, dancers, heroes only at beating the dance rings. You plunder your own people for lambs and kids. So again, the kids he has left are not Hector. He doesn't even mention Paris, right? Who's the guy who caused all of this death and destruction. That's a glaring omission there. I'm sure he can't even think about Paris, who's probably off polishing his sword somewhere. Zeus sends Hermes to guide Priam to Achilles' ship safely, so he can give a ransom for Hector's body. Achilles' mother, the goddess Thetis, has convinced Achilles to give up the body because the gods are angry with him for shaming it. In doing so, she tries to get Achilles to come back to the world of the living. But even while doing so, she reminds him of his impending doom on page 592. But his noble mother, settling down at his side, stroked Achilles gently, whispering his name. My child, how long will you eat your heart out here in tears and torment? All wiped from your mind, all thought of food and bed? It's a welcome thing to make love with a woman. You don't have long to live now. Well, I know. Already I see them looming up beside you. Death and the strong force of fate. Listen to me. No, she tries to comfort him, say like, hey, why don't you go sleep with Briseis? She's right there in the tent for you. You don't have much time left. You're going to die soon, son. So Achilles just can't escape his obsession over his own death. Meanwhile, Priam's wife, Hecuba, clearly enraged and grief herself. She tries to prevent Priam from going to visit Achilles on page 595. But his wife cried out in answer, No, where have your senses gone that made you famous once, both among outland men and those you rule in Troy? How can you think of going down to the ships alone and face the glance of the man who killed your sons, so many fine, brave boys? You have a heart of iron. If he gets you in his clutches, sets his eyes on you, the savage, treacherous man, he'll show no mercy, no respect for your rights. Come, all we can do now is sit in the halls, far from our son, and wail for Hector. So this is the doom that strong fate spun out, our son's lifeline drawn with his first breath, the moment I gave him birth, to glut the wild dogs, cut off from his parents, crushed by the stronger man. Oh, would to God that I could sink my teeth in his liver, eat him raw. That's grief. That is a mother's grief right there. She wants to eat Achilles' liver raw, right? She's thinking about, the son she bore and how his lifelines meant that he was going to be a feast for the dogs and birds. But Priam goes anyway. Hermes guides him into Achilles' camp. Without any Argive seeing him, Priam kneels down in front of Achilles and clutches his knees. He kisses the hands, those terrible man-killing hands that had slaughtered Priam's many sons in battle, including Hector. Imagine that, the very hands that killed his sons. He kisses them. Achilles is even amazed at this. It makes him think of his own father's grief, and the two begin to weep together. Priam goes on and talks about all the sons that have died. Those words stirred within Achilles a deep desire to grieve for his own father. Taking the old man's hand, he gently moved him back, and overpowered by memory, both men gave way to grief. Priam wept freely for man-killing Hector, throbbing, crouching before Achilles' feet, as Achilles wept himself, now for his father, now for Patroclus once again. And their sobbing rose and fell throughout the house. Then, when brilliant Achilles had had his fill of tears, and the longing for it had left his mind and body, he rose from his seat, raised the old man by the hand, and filled with pity now for his gray head and gray beard, he spoke out winging words, flying straight to the heart. Poor man, how much you've borne, pain to break the spirit. What daring brought you down to the ships all alone, to face the glance of the man who killed your sons, so many fine, brave boys? You have a heart of iron. Come, please sit down on the chair here. Let us put our griefs to rest in our own hearts. Rake them up no more, raw as we are with mourning. What good is it to be one? What good's to be won from tears that chill the spirit? Now, what do you notice here? Achilles actually seems human again. He's grieving with Priam. They're sitting together. They're talking man to man. However, it doesn't last. But the old man, the old and noble Priam, protested strongly. Don't make me sit on a chair, Achilles, prince, not while Hector lies, uncared for in your camp. Give him back to me. Now, no more delay. I must see my son with my own eyes. Accept the ransom I bring you, a king's ransom. Enjoy it, all of it. Return to your own native land, safe and sound, since now you've spared my life. A dark glance, and the headstrong runner answered. No more, old man. Don't tempt my wrath, not now. My own mind's made up to give you back your son. A messenger brought me word from Zeus, my mother, Thetis, who bore me, the old man of the sea's daughter. And what's more, I can see through you, Priam. No hiding the fact from me. One of the gods has led you down to Achaea's fast ships. No man alive, not even a rugged young fighter, would dare to venture into our camp. Never! How could he slip past the sentries unchallenged, or shoot back the bolt of my gates with so much ease? So don't anger me now. Don't stir my raging heart still more, or under my own roof I may not spare your life, old man, suppliant that you are, may break the laws of Zeus. So the dark glance of Achilles returns. Why does it return? It returns when Priam mentions his dead son. He's reminded, that is, Achilles is reminded of his own death, and his rage returns. Remember, when he killed Hector, what armor was Hector wearing? He was wearing Achilles' armor. So when he thinks of the death of Hector, he can only think of the death of himself. And remember the irony here. Achilles, when he kills Hector, is essentially killing himself because A, Hector looks like Achilles, he's wearing his armor, and B, when he kills Hector, his fate is sealed, right? And he, after winning this kleos of killing Hector, is now doomed to a short life. The thing he's been brooding about for 24 books of the Iliad. So when Priam mentions Hector's death, Achilles gives him the dark glance. So I want you to remember the opening line of the opening lines of the Iliad. They tell us about rage, Achilles' rage, and here it's flaring again. However, Achilles does calm down. He gives Priam Hector's body, which he has had his serving girls bathe and anoint. Remember, the body has not decayed at all, thanks to Apollo. And both he and Priam finally find some peace. On page 609, Priam tells Achilles that, like him, he has not been able to sleep, eat, or drink. Together, though, they now have a feast, and Priam is able to sleep in the very camp of his son's killer, which is kind of amazing. Let me read. They reached out for the good things that lay at hand, and when they had put aside desire for food and drink, Priam, the son of Dardanus, gazed at Achilles, marveling now at the man's beauty. his magnificent build. Face to face, he seemed a deathless god. And Achilles gazed and marveled at Dardan Priam, beholding his noble looks, listening to his words. But once they'd had their fill of gazing at each other, the old majestic Priam broke the silence first. Put me to bed quickly, Achilles, prince. Time to rest, to enjoy the sweet relief of sleep. Not once have my eyes closed shut beneath my lids from the day my sun went down beneath your hands. Day and night I groan, brooding over the countless griefs, groveling in the dung that fills my walled-in court. But now, at long last, I have tasted food again, and let some glistening wine go down my throat. Before this hour, I had tasted nothing. He shook his head as Achilles briskly told his men and serving women to make beds in the porch's shelter, to lay down some heavy purple throws for the beds themselves, and over them spread some blankets, thick woolly robes, a warm covering laid on top. So there you have it. These two men who have not been able to eat, sleep, or drink have finally found peace. And they find peace in each other. It's kind of a beautiful scene. If you think about how grisly this epic is, it's beautiful to see these two men, one old, one young, one mourning the death of his son, the other mourning his own death. I'm sure Priam is also thinking about his own death and his city's death as well. And they finally have this moment of peace. These men hate each other, right? Priam's son Hector killed Achilles' best friend Patroclus, and Achilles has killed Hector's best son, Priam's best son Hector. But they mourn together. Achilles agrees to allow Priam 12 days to mourn and bury his son before the fighting starts up again. Priam has restored Achilles' humanity. Hector's body is loaded into Priam's wagon, and he takes his son home. It's as if Priam has descended to the underworld and retrieved his son. Achilles is the master of that underworld, and he's finally given up his rage. So that's my view of book 24, that Achilles is kind of a Hades-like character here who can think of nothing but death, his own death, and the death of the dozens of other people he wants to kill. And yet finally he's kind of released from this rage. And so this long epic that began with rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. And that was a rage that was both murderous and doomed, right? Murderous, he kills a lot of people. Doomed, he himself is doomed. And it ends on this simple and peaceful line. And so the Trojans buried Hector, breaker of horses. So we start with rage and we end with peace. And that, I think, is a pretty interesting end to this epic, and shows us this kind of cool structure of the epic from rage to peace. Thanks for listening, and go ahead and check out what I put on the class notebook in Microsoft Teams, and we'll have a nice quiz about that. All right, thanks a lot.